It's your boy, Remoy George Philip the First.
And I'm Samantha and Remoy Kifler.
This is Masculinity.
The show that investigates the performance of masculinity in the world today, and you know we spell it with a hard K. So, Remoy.
Yes, Samantha.
I got a question for you.
Okay, let's let the reporting begin. Let's go.
Well, so how often do you feel optimistic?
Optimistic, like about life? Is that what we're talking about right now?
Yeah, like would you say that you feel optimistic all or most of the time?
Let's not do binaries, Like, let's do spectrum. Like, Obama years, that's when I think I was the most optimistic. Shit was good. I mean, it wasn't good, but come on. I was just at least a little bit more optimistic.
It wasn't
I think more recent COVID, not so much, obviously. But then after COVID, I was optimistic. A lot of the world wasn't, but I was. I was good. Last year, no. So, yeah, we'll just, in that last year, maybe I'll say like 12%, 13.5%, maybe on a good day, 22.7%,
Okay, so we're on the left side of the spectrum, and you're part of about 42% of American adults who feel that way, according to Pew Research Center's latest report on social connections.
Latest, as you mean the new report, huh?
Yeah, so Pew actually released a report called Men, Women, and Social Connections, where they measured how optimistic and lonely Americans feel.
Okay, but social connections, like I'm assuming that's like friends, besties, friendships, right?
Yeah, so the report actually also measured how many friends Americans have and who they'd reach out to for emotional support, among other things.
Okay, fascinating. All right, and this is like another embargoed version, like you got a chance to read through it before it was released to the world?
Yeah, honestly, shout out to Pew for sending that report over, and shout out to them always. I had a chance to talk to one of the authors of this report, actually, Kim Parker, who's the director of social trends and research at Pew.
All right, not mad at that. But, after reading the report and talking with Kim, like what's the one insight or feeling you're coming away with?
Well, I think that it's that there are a lot of the ways that Americans feel that have evolved compared to like the way we traditionally live life, but they don't really act that way. So like they feel a certain way, they act a different way, and I think that's all due to perception. That's really what I'm coming up with after this report.
Well, did you ask her why?
Actually, I did, and we'll get into that right after the break.
Curious about next-gen men? We're a small part of a much larger movement to undefine masculinity for a brighter future. Our mission is clear: empower the next generation to use their curiosity, empathy, and courage to build a more equitable world. Join the Next Gen Men community as we learn and unlearn together. We're here to support boys and men to break free from limiting stereotypes. We're not just an organization, we're a catalyst for reimagining masculinity and fostering inclusivity. We're here to help open up possibilities for what men and boys can be. Explore the world of Next Gen Men at nextgenmen.ca and join the community to make a difference. Next Gen Men, shaping tomorrow's leaders one step at a time. Join us and help undefine masculinity and empower the next generation of men to lead with empathy and courage.
All right, so we're back. So friendships and social connections.
All right, the new paper we got access to. I mean, but like, I need to hear more. Like, is the data, kind of organized in men and women only?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, statistical data still suffers from being very restricted to just two genders. So yeah.
Okay, but is like data science getting better about this whole binary thing?
Oh yeah, there are some kick-ass, really dope folks fighting the fight to make data more inclusive and more reflective of the society that we actually live in. So shout out to them, doing the good work.
Yeah, let's get them in a future episode because that sounds sick. But this paper, right? Why or how, maybe?
Well, I'm glad you asked because Kim told it all. So here goes.
So we've been, for the last 6 months or so working on, or even longer, working on a big project on men and masculinity, because this has been very much a part of the national conversation. The first one came out before the election and focused more on sort of looking at these issues through a political and ideological lens. And then this one, we wanted to look separately at the concepts of social connections, well-being, friendship, those kinds of things. There's been a lot of conversation about loneliness in this country, and particularly about potentially an epidemic of male loneliness. So we wanted to explore that and see, when we talk to thousands of Americans, are men really feel more likely to say they feel lonely than women? And where do they draw support when they do need emotional support? Where do they turn? So those are some of the things that we explored in this report. And we thought it made sense to give this sort of a separate treatment from the other kind of deep dive we did on modern masculinity.
Okay, so Kim's talking about 2 papers here, I think, and that must be the first one we received, I don't know, a month ago, and we discussed about it before the election. And this one about friendships and also targeting are Americans lonely?
Yeah, exactly. So, this series on masculinity, which is amazing, first of all, that Pew is doing that, right? First kind of measured along the political lines because it was leading up to the election. They wanted to see how people felt. And especially because this was such a quote unquote gendered election, right? And then this new report is really measuring people have been talking about male loneliness for a while. Where do Americans stand on that? Which I think is really timely and great.
Well, that's the elephant in the room. We've been discussing this thesis a lot with others and ourselves. Are men lonely? Or are they at least more lonely than the rest of the people in the world?
Well, what would you guess?
Yeah. As we've discussed, I would say yes. And as I've clocked with friends and other male figures in my life, that bias, I would say so. I think almost adamantly, yes, I think. Yeah.
All right. Yeah. Yeah. So let's see if you're right.
We found that 16% of Americans say they feel lonely or isolated from others around them all or most of the time. But when we looked to see if men and women reported those feelings at differing rates, we found that they really didn't. Similar shares of men and women, almost exactly the same share, said that they often feel lonely or isolated from others around them.
Oh, fascinating. So it's no, men and women are actually feeling roughly around the same bit of loneliness. If they are feeling it, the percentages are relatively equal. Is that what we're saying?
Basically. And I feel that's really wild, right? Because it's we've been talking about this for so long. We've talked about it a bunch right here on this podcast. And so it's now having heard this, I was really surprised to read this in the report and talking to Kim about it. And so it's why do we think that there's an epidemic of male loneliness?
Yeah,
right?
That's a fascinating, good question. I guess the thing that's still the data that I still turn to, even if these numbers are still a stasis or equal, is men are still committing suicide, and the suicide rates among men are far more than they are of women. And so there must be a correlation or something missing within that correlation. It's not the loneliness factor, but there's something else that is driving the death rate up that makes that loneliness feel more pronounced, I think.
Yeah, I think it is indeed clear that the suicide rates for men are still through the roof. But Kim did have some insight to share on here that might help us out too.
We asked people, if you needed emotional support, where would you turn? How likely would you be to turn to all these different sources? And there we saw for both men and women, if they had a spouse or partner, that was the number one person. 74% of both men and women who had a spouse or partner said that's where they'd go for emotional support. But then when we went to other types of relationship beyond partner or spouse, women were more likely than men to say that they turned to their mother, to a friend, to another family member other than a parent or spouse or partner, and also to a mental health professional, which I thought was interesting.
Okay, so what do you hear there?
Yeah, I think it's kind of related to that. It must be related. That's the missing correlation, is that men, at least by their findings, are not seeking or don't have the tools or equipped or empowered to ask for support like women do. Women are more empowered to do that. And therefore, the loneliness may feel the same, but that there's more support for women, and women are more capable and able to seek support as compared to men.
Yeah. And why do you think that is?
I mean, it's always what it's going to boil down to. It's like how we're socialized. That's easy to say, but like the shows, the characters, the stuff that we see, the male figures in our lives are be stoic, and we do it by ourselves, and we're tough, and we're American men. No?
Am I talking to Remoy as a 21-year-old? Mm-hmm. Did you pop your collar when you were 21? Tell everybody the truth. I know you did.
Bro, I wore 2 polos at the same time, and they were both pop collars. Come on.
Oh, amazing.
Double pop that collar.
Amazing. It's Remoy the literati doer with the best Americana you've ever heard, and I'm so here for it.
I don't know about the best. The worst, maybe? Sure.
Okay, but on a serious tip, though, like, did you experience that personally? Like, of course, I know I'm talking to Mr. Stoic here in some ways, but, it's worth asking.
You don't know me. No, I've gotten much better at, I have great, honestly, I'm like, every day I think about like how fucking amazing and grateful I am for all the people I have in my life across all the genders and ages. And I talk to people all day, every day, and feel so supported. Even therapy has been such an incredible resource, but still, even me and therapist Claire were talking about this last week. I have challenges of like literally asking for help, or I can crack jokes and I can talk about movies and TV and girls with friends. That's no problem. But like when it comes to asking for help or reaching out for like when I need support, still a challenge.
That's real life. And actually this took me back, like all the way back to one of the first masculinity episodes ever with Yuval Moses. This is like season 1. I think he was like episode 2 or 3. Like, yeah, way back. So for the OG listeners, you may remember this interview talking about men as victims of violent crime. I'm sure you remember this.
Oh, yeah. I mean, the content was good. The audio may have been dog curse word, but, we were learning back then.
I know. Shout out to Brooklyn Public Library, where we used to record our podcast. It's crazy. But yeah, Yuval said something about trauma that I think may also apply to loneliness, which was that it's not that the trauma happened necessarily. Of course, that's awful, but it's really whether it was dealt with and how it was dealt with that stays with us, right? That determines kind of like the course of our life. And I think that that's what's happening here, right? Like when it's time for men to reach out for emotional support, when they're dealing with that distress, they're letting less people support them.
Yeah, when you put it like that, like it's really, I'm like thinking about myself in this, and it's just really kind of sad. Like when I feel sad, it's sad that I am not in a culture that's as better supporting me to like get support. And I feel so scared to ask for support, or overwhelmed, or I don't want to upset people, or I don't want to look less masculine. Huh. That's interesting. But like, okay, are they casting a narrower net for emotional support, I think, but are they actually reaching out less?
That's a really good question. And the report does address that.
Men and women are about equally likely to say they have close friends. And women are a little more likely to say they have one close friend, and men are a little more likely to say that they have more than one close friend. But when you put them all together, men and women are equally likely to say that they have at least one close friend. So we didn't see a big deficit there. But where we did see differences were in the frequency with which they are in touch with each other, which I think, that could be just for hanging out, having fun, but it could also get into the emotional support space as well.
Okay, so it's interesting, like the number of close friends are relatively the same, but it is true that men just don't reach out as much as women do. Is that right?
Yeah, men are reaching out less often and to less people. And really, that's the mask, right? That's that mask with a hard K.
Okay, I hear you, but more words, please.
What is the premise of this whole podcast? Like, men respond to emotional distress differently. Their response is less external than women's due to this binary socialization that tells them to internalize, right?
About to get a little mad, like when you said men respond to emotional distress differently. You should put the binary socialization first, because we've been socialized to believe that we should respond to emotions differently, or our distresses, or our pain, or whatever. But yeah, whatever. All right.
So as we mentioned, Kim Parker was co-author of the Pew Report on Americans' Opinions on Men and Masculinity. So I had to ask her what correlation she saw between the two reports with regards to this question. Like, do overall perceptions of men and masculinity impact men's ability to reach out?
I don't know what that means in this context. Help me out.
Well, so, you remember in the other report, right? It was like, generally, like the majority of Americans came away saying that there's not enough value being placed on men who are caring, open with their emotions, soft-spoken.
Right.
And there was like a fourth one. Yeah. So like, there's not enough value there, right? We agree on that. But then it's like, and then of course, and on the flip side of that, the whole risk-taking thing was too valued. But then it's like, okay, knowing that perception, is that why men are not reaching out?
Oh, okay. That's a good question. What did you find out?
Well, I feel like I know the answer to that, but here's the statistical backing from Kim.
There's one sort of interesting through line that we found, and that was when we asked people about certain traits that men may or may not have, and to what extent society values those traits in men. And one of the big findings there was that 60% of Americans think that society doesn't place enough value on men who are open about their emotions. So that kind of suggested that there's an awareness or a feeling on the part of most Americans that we're just not lifting up men who do this. We're not placing a lot of value on it. It doesn't tie directly to these findings, but I think it's an interesting connection, because if men are not as likely to say that they tap into all these sources of support, maybe it's because they don't feel like they're really valued if they're open about their emotions. So maybe they kind of keep them under wraps.
Oh, okay. Interesting. So it's like Americans do want better models for men being open about their emotions. Like we want that. Or maybe it's like we all should be valuing that men do this more, right?
Yes. Yeah, essentially.
But on the other side, there are also traits that society places too much value on, right?
Exactly. And she continues on with that.
We found that people think society places too much value on men who are physically strong, who are risk takers, who are assertive. So, yeah, it was interesting. We kind of tried to come up with a mix of traits that were many people might view as feminine versus masculine. And what we saw was the public really kind of expressing that, hey, maybe we should place more value on these things, and then maybe everyone would feel a little bit better, or be able to express themselves.
Yeah, so what struck me here is that while people may overwhelmingly know that, it doesn't mean that they'll act on it, right? Like, I mean, we talked with Juliana right before the election, and the report gave me hope that a woman potentially could be elected president based on this traits conversation, right? Like, I think there was even a section in the report that was talking about like leadership qualities leaders should embody more of the traits that are less traditional to men, more traditional to women in terms of like the caring, the listening, kind of like the circular leadership, if you will. But we're still getting to watch like Trump's inauguration today.
Yeah, and we've unpacked whether it was in that episode or the follow-up episodes. Like it's the inauguration or the election was complicated, but one thing we saw was like that the internet plays a role and like social media plays a role, especially when it comes to men, I think.
Yeah, I mean, there was one determining factor where certain populations were lonelier than others, like significantly. Do you want to guess what that is?
Well, I would have thought it's men, but obviously that we've covered that, so I have no idea.
All right, let's take a listen.
We found a bigger divide by age than by gender. And kind of interestingly, it's young people who are much more likely than older people to say that they often feel lonely. And here by younger and older, I'm talking about under 50 and 50 plus, because we looked within the under 50 group. We thought maybe 18 to 29-year-olds would be different from 30 to 49-year-olds, but they really weren't. So that whole sort of group of people under 50 are more likely to say they often feel lonely than older people.
Oh, okay. So it's like young people. And I'm assuming this actually probably is connected to what I said earlier about like the social media internet thing. But did Pew track like what caused the loneliness for younger folks? Like, is that in the report?
Not in this one, but she did have some insight from other sources. She has reported on this before.
I was looking back at some previous research we had done looking at time use data because we were looking specifically at older adults and living arrangements and how much time older adults spend alone. And older adults, not surprisingly, spend so much more time alone than younger adults do. Yet they're less likely to say that they're lonely. So it's almost like, it's more of an inner state, inner feeling than it is necessarily like how many people you're surrounded with. And then of course we didn't get into it really in this report, but lots of other researchers and our colleagues on our internet team have the impact of social media. So you might feel like you're constantly in contact with people, but that's not really feeding you it might make you feel more lonely and isolated because you don't feel the same kind of connection that you might feel either in person or sometimes the things you're seeing are making you feel worse, So that's a whole other element of this that needs tons more study.
Okay, yeah. So kids are online more, and alpha and beta, those gens or whatever, like there's big disconnect there, and it's creating like this weird ecosphere of what expectations are for connection and relationship, and wow, it's wild.
It is wild because it's like, one thing too that that kind of came up for me when I was talking to Kim is that, kids aren't just on social media to be social, right? They're not just on devices for like recreational purposes. Like a lot of school is not conducted online,
Good point.
Yeah. So it's like their lives just generally have more screens in them. That's like the normalcy of their lives lives inside the blue light in a lot of ways. And so I think, yes, social media, of course, plays a part. But just the digital age really does as well. And so to color in the lines a bit here, like younger generations are really struggling with human connection in general, right? Like, I mean, let's not even talk about COVID. I mean, we already kind of covered that, but especially boys, and again, apparently teens report being almost constantly on social media, and that's regardless of their gender, according to another Pew study. But boys not being socialized to like reach out and be social like girls and women are really puts them in a bad spot when it comes to that.
And this kind of ties back to like very first episode of this season. It's like that's where the the Andrew Tates and Jordan Petersons and other horrible actors like that can step in and, connect with these boys and feed them really bad just messages and ideas about the world and horrible things. And woof.
I know.
Here we are today, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's like, it's rough because, what I think about too is like you end up kind of thinking of other ways that boys can interact. And then there's like other kind of traditional ways of doing that, right? Like get yourself outside, play some sports, do some other traditionally masculine things that will get you away from the screen, which really to go back to Trevor's point, who actually was on the interview with Juliana talking about how men and boys don't have an off-ramp. Like there's just such a habit. And now we've created this whole new habit in the digital age, and they don't really have a way out. And it's like, it's not just men, right? Like there's also a way that other genders have all kind of gotten used to what masculinity is, the way that patriarchy functions. And like, we all have to kind of recode that. It really goes back to that point of there's like perception and then there's reality and then there's like whatever people are willing to act on, which, we'll see how it goes.
Word.
All right. Well, good luck to us. Today is the day.
Yeah. So it's a big day. It's a big day for the world and America. And it's a day for people who have the privilege and the skills and the tools and the ability at the moment to like figure out how we respond.
Yes. And I do want to say, like, I've talked a lot about doing the work and all of these things. And it's like, really, it's so important to like take care of yourself in this time as well. Like, especially if you're, not in a position to like spend a lot of money to like dedicate your time to do a lot of this. Like really rest is resistance at this moment in time. And like the next 4 years are going to be dedicated to making a lot of us become worker bees and make money for like all these billionaires who are now in the government. So like sometimes the work is self-care. So let's just hopefully try to remember that take care of yourself.
Yeah, and let's also, self-care can look like a lot of things. So, as we've talked about in this episode, whether you're a man, woman, anywhere on the gender spectrum, like asking for support can be self-care.
Mm-hmm.
Taking a walk with a friend can be self-care. Giving time for yourself any time in the day to just get off a screen can be self-care, right? So I think we ourselves are going to take care of some of that self-care, right?
Yeah. Actually, this is the last episode of season 4.
Yeah, and it's been a really lovely, good one. Special one, actually.
Yeah, it's been great. And, we're going to regroup and we're going to meet you in the next few months.
And yeah, perfect time. You got so much time. You should start today, yesterday. Give us 5 stars. 5 stars, 5 stars, 5 stars.
Yes, 5 stars. And honestly, please let us know what your favorite moments of this seasons were, right? Like, we had a lot of episodes. We talked to a lot of cool people. We really want to hear from you and really encourage you to write in, be it anonymously, via the website, via DMs, like, holler at us.
I mean, feel free to document your favorite Remoy joke. Like, what was your favorite? What brought you to tears, maybe? What made you chuckle 5 hours later? But in that meantime, we'll be hanging out. We're still around. You'll continue to receive newsletters more on a monthly basis, and you can get that by signing up at masculinitypod.com.
Yes, and we'll still be on social, of course, at masculinitypod on Twitter, IG, and now we're on Mastodon. So, of course, be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts so that you're ready for us when we come back. And there might even been a special episode or 2 before season 5. So
sweet.
Definitely do that.
Well, until then, it's your boy, Remoy George Philip the First.
And I'm Samantha and Kifle. Thank you so much for listening.
Peace.
Ciao.